Hello and welcome back to my 10 favorite people. Hope you're doing well. I went ahead and added the percentages we talked about in the last video to the chart here. I did make some changes. I do think it was unfair to put the green at the same likelihood as the red. I do think the red macro doomer Great Depression scenario is incredibly unlikely. I will keep it on the chart nonetheless as a reminder that anything is possible in markets and nothing is guaranteed, especially in a riskier asset class like this one. But I do think the green is quite a bit more likely than the red. This would be a scenario where the Fed ends up cutting rates even with a hot economy and a tight labor market, which would result in some type of risk asset melt up. I do think that is incredibly unlikely, but the Fed has definitely surprised me in the past, so we will keep this as a possibility as well. I did also bump up the likelihood of the orange a tiny bit from 20% to 25%. This is just because I don't have that much faith in the Fed pulling off a soft landing. They don't have a good track record of pulling off soft landings, so I have that at 25%, especially after such a strong rally from Bitcoin. If we do end up seeing any type of macro uncertainty or weakness in the economy, that could put quite a bit of downward pressure on Bitcoin and other risk assets. I don't think it's that likely at 25%, but I think it's worth keeping it on here anyway. And of course, what I think is by far the most likely is the yellow scenario. Once the halving is behind us, once a lot of the ETF excitement is behind us, it would make sense for Bitcoin to cool off a little bit and consolidate. Maybe something around a 30% correction would make sense to me and would give us some nice reaccumulation before we go higher. And I think a lot of people wouldn't even buy this dip because the left translated cycle narrative would become so strong if we did see a larger correction at this point. So we'll see what ends up happening. I still think this is by far the most likely outcome, and it would be the most healthiest if we are going to continue higher going into 2025. But of course, we're going to have to monitor it and see what happens. But I will keep all of these possibilities on the chart just to kind of keep an eye on it going forward and see what happens. As for the halving itself, this is obviously an exciting event every time it occurs. If you guys haven't experienced the halving before, it's mostly just a lot of people celebrating and making memes on Twitter saying that Bitcoin, just had its quantitative hardening or quantitative tightening or whatever term we use to kind of meme what the Fed calls their monetary policy changes. But it usually doesn't do much for price. If anything, I would expect price to cool off a little bit once that event and excitement is behind us. But of course, long term, still bullish and should still put upward pressure on price with a cut in the supply issuance. But most investors, including I'm sure most of you watching this video and myself, have positioned for this well in advance and knew about this halving years ago. So the idea that this is going to change everything the day that it happens and all of a sudden price is going to start rallying is unlikely in my opinion, because both investors and miners alike prepare for this event in advance. Investors tend to buy in anticipation because markets are forward looking, and miners tend to start hedging in advance, upgrading to newer rigs and trying to prepare for the halving. So it is bullish long term, but short term, the event is always overblown and doesn't usually result in any short-term major price action to the upside. As for the ETFs, they do seem to be finding some type of equilibrium. I do think there's going to be less and less alpha looking at this inflow data day to day. They've already existed for 2 months and a half roughly, which is insane because it feels like they just launched yesterday, and over 12 billion in net inflows is incredibly impressive, especially because I expect a lot of the money that left Grayscale didn't even go into these other ETFs, and I'm sure a lot of issuers and asset managers are really looking to launch their own products because of the success that we've seen with these Bitcoin ETFs. And we're seeing headlines like that already with Hashdex getting approved to launch their Bitcoin spot ETF. And I'm sure that Fidelity and BlackRock and all these asset managers are going to put a huge fight against the SEC to make the Ethereum ETF happen because of how much they're going to make on fees with the Bitcoin ETF and how clear it is that US customers really wanted these products and were forced into way more inefficient products like the Grayscale Trust because of the SEC. And I think there should be a lot of excitement and volatility for Ethereum going into that May deadline. I do think BlackRock is going to put up a fight. Larry Fink said that whether Ethereum is a security or not, they're still going to make the ETF happen. And it's kind of funny because in our industry, security is like this terrible thing that everybody is scared of. But I mean, stocks and shares and all the indexes that are currently in ETFs are securities themselves. So even though I don't think Ethereum is a security, if the SEC is able to prove it is one, that doesn't mean BlackRock can't still launch their ETF. And what's interesting is the CFTC actually still calls Ethereum a commodity. And that's what the SEC used to do as well, especially when they approved those Ethereum futures. But very recently in the KuCoin complaint, the CFTC said once again Ethereum is a commodity, and now you have this CFTC versus SEC scenario. And I just think there's too many headwinds for the SEC to block this. I mean, you have users clearly showing they want these type of products based on inflow data. You have the largest asset managers in the world like BlackRock and Fidelity having a very strong financial incentive because of fees to make this Ethereum ETF happen as well. And you even have the CFTC saying Ethereum is a commodity and not a security. So I think the SEC has their case cut out for them. I think it's incredible that so many people don't think this is going to happen, even with BlackRock's 576 to 1 track record. And of course, we could sell off in the short term. There's going to be a lot of volatility as new headlines come out. But I think it's incredibly likely we end up having an Ethereum ETF within the next 6 months. It's not something I'm willing to trade and sell here and try to buy it back lower because there's fear of a ETF rejection or anything like that. I do think Ethereum will get its ETF, and I do think that will send price significantly higher, especially because Ethereum is a deflationary asset. I know a lot of people don't care about this right now because Bitcoin has been outperforming Ethereum and Ethereum has been lagging quite a bit. And of course, you have things like Solana absolutely crushing Ethereum and having a much better user experience for retail. But I do still think Ethereum is going to have a lot of demand, whether institutions start doing stuff with it. I mean, BlackRock put $100 million on Ethereum, on the Ethereum blockchain. And even though I saw that get a lot of attention, I still think people are underestimating how crazy it is that a $10 trillion asset manager felt comfortable putting $100 million on Ethereum. And I do think this deflationary aspect will matter as we enter a bull market and as excitement and usage of the chain continues. And of course, with the recent Denkun upgrade and fees being a lot cheaper for layer 2s, I do think that's going to increase activity for those layer 2s, which will lead to more Ethereum being used and burned, which would lead to more deflationary supply pressure. And I just think that there's a very low likelihood that unless we enter some type of black swan scenario, I think it's very unlikely that with a looming ETF and with its deflationary aspect, it's hard for me to see a world where Bitcoin outperforms Ethereum over the next 12 months. But of course, that's why I hold both. I'm not one of these people that is an Ethereum maxi and makes fun of Bitcoin and Solana, or I'm not a Bitcoin maxi that doesn't hold anything else because I only believe in Bitcoin. In my opinion, why not hold all the projects that you see a high likelihood in? Why try to pick winners and have zero exposure to other plays? It is funny that my Ethereum position is almost as large as my Bitcoin position. That wasn't really my intention originally, but this is actually a allocation that I'm incredibly comfortable with all of these tailwinds looming for Ethereum with these potential ETFs that are upcoming and what I'm seeing with the supply burn. But short term, the chart doesn't look too great. I'm not going to short it or sell or try to do anything like that, but this wick to the upside on Ethereum and Bitcoin doesn't look amazing. We're also seeing something similar with Solana as well. I mean, with Solana, it's not even that surprising. This move has been absolutely insane. And we talked about how the last major FOMO candle got completely retraced after spiking the high. And I would not be surprised if we saw something like that again, especially if we get this yellow scenario where we're expecting a correction from Bitcoin. You would expect a larger correction from Ethereum. A retest of 2400 would be an amazing entry in my opinion. I don't know if we get it. And with the amount of upside that Solana has had and the amount of people that I'm sure bought at these much higher prices, I would expect Solana to sell off more than Bitcoin and Ethereum because of how worried people will be over their unrealized gains if we do start to see a larger correction on Solana and I do think the zero point 0.5 Fibonacci retrace is a very important level to watch. And of course, we're continuing to see amazing fundamentals for Solana. This is the share of new tokens appearing on dexes, and you have Solana in purple, and then you have Base in pink, and you can just see the amount of excitement and demand. I mean, I'm not much of a meme coin speculator myself, but retail wanting to use the chain and the amount of demand and user growth we're seeing on Solana right now was kind of my thesis all along, of retail not caring about decentralization, and they just want to be able to use a chain they can actually afford to use. And I think that's why there has been continued excitement with Solana, and I think we see that very clearly in this share of new tokens appearing on DEX's data. But of course, I do keep my Solana position smaller than Ethereum and Bitcoin because I do expect more volatility on Solana, and it is up so much off of the lows where we had that accumulation. So I would not be that comfortable if Solana was a much larger portion of my portfolio, because I'm more in risk management mode right now versus trying to be 100% risk on, because as we mentioned, the yellow case is still what's most likely in my opinion. So I'd rather just ride it out with my current allocations. And of course, speaking of allocations, we're still waiting on this breakout for Bitcoin dominance. I mean, this has literally been like watching paint dry for weeks now. The structure looks incredibly bullish. I mean, you can call it an inverse head and shoulders, you can call it an ascending triangle, and it would make sense that if Bitcoin were to see a correction, altcoins would go down more, and that should put upward pressure on dominance. But this is just taking forever to break out, obviously. But there are some good fundamental narratives for this breakout to occur. You do have rumors now that the court is going to rule against Coinbase in their case. Of course, Coinbase is going against the SEC because the SEC tried to declare a bunch of projects like Solana and Cardano to be securities. The SEC is also not happy with Coinbase's staking program. And if Coinbase does end up losing this case, it could be a pretty large catalyst for altcoins to go down against Bitcoin, even though I don't think it would matter that much in the long term. And I do think this does get resolved in the long term. But of course, until the ruling actually happens, it's all speculation for now. But I feel pretty great not being too altcoin heavy while this type of stuff is going on, and while Bitcoin dominance looks like it wants to break out, and while I believe Bitcoin will have a correction in the very near future. So for now, I think it's no altcoins for me. If opportunities present themselves, I will definitely mention it on this channel, but for now, I don't think I'll be buying altcoins anytime soon in the near future, when this yellow scenario is by far the most likely one in my opinion, and we're seeing this weaker price action from Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana in the short term. Of course, long term still incredibly bullish, but short term, this just doesn't feel to me like the best place to be piling in for short term upside in riskier plays based on everything we discussed in this video. But anyway, we'll see what happens. Let me know what you expect. Do you agree with these percentage likelihoods that I have listed here? Would love to know what you guys think. But anyway, of course, thank you so much for the support on the recent videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.